very much severely changes when I became a parent. And I think to myself, this is part of that ever-changing process of our perspectives and everything that the Dharma teaches us about. The thing that we think about when we think about the Dharma and the constant changing, the constant impermanence that always surrounds us, no matter what. Childhood and parenthood are one of those things that really show the true meaning of how things will constantly change. What things that worked that used to put Tetsuo to sleep don't work, things that worked last week don't work this week. Things that will probably work this week won't work next week, right? And the same thing, his personality will probably change the next week as well. Who knows what he will be like in 1 year? And it's very interesting. Time is measured very differently as well with parenthood. They say that the days are long, but the years are short. It already feels like a year has passed by since Tetsuo has been born, just with the constant attention that we are giving him. But in that short amount of time, it's incredible to see how much he's changed. I apologize. I forgot to send photos to put up on the screen for you to see, but no doubt you will all get to see wonderful, cute photos of Tetsuo, as I have, been taking a lot of them. Thank goodness for smartphones. I don't know what you parents did without smartphones, back in the day when you were growing up. You probably had to take those pictures with the camera and then go get them developed at Costco, right? Take your films into Costco, and then you go when they're ready in a week to be picked up, and you look for your name in those folders. I remember those days. But now I would also like to talk about, in terms of the Dharma, in terms of Jodo Shinshu, our school of Buddhism, right? This phrase. I took this from the back where the picture is headed up, is hanging up. This phrase, this kanji character phrase, this was actually written by our current head priest in Japan, Monshu Kojun Otani, or Shaku Senyo. He's the 25th descendant of Shinran Shonin. Okay, so you have this calligraphy painting here, and you're probably wondering what it says. And by the way, it's again, it's in Japanese, right? You don't read things you don't read things from left to right. You read things from right to left. Okay, so, and the same thing, right? You don't usually, right? The kanji characters are up and down, right? So and again, you read from the right to the left. So what you're seeing here is a phrase called Jishin Kyoниnshin. Jishin Kyoninshin. This was a phrase that is from Master Shandao, or Zendo Daishi, who is depicted up on the Seven Masters wall. But this basically means discover or reaffirm the Shinjin, or faith or trust you have in the Buddha, in yourself first, and then share with others. So it's interesting because it's not that necessarily our school of Buddhism or our sect or the way that we conduct Buddhism is a proselytizing. We don't go door to door, like as some of you probably would be annoyed by, right? With people we're trying to convert people to our school of Buddhism, right? That being said, one of the things that we're trying to do constantly, and according to Shinran, is examine ourselves. This is what Buddhism is actually for: self-examination, self-reflection. Okay? Before we actually go, proselytizing or trying to convert other people or say you should do what we do or believe in the way we believe, where you might see some folks standing on street corners with signs, saying you have to convert to this way or in order to be saved, kind of a thing. The constant effort and the constant effort and action that we should be doing as Jodo Shinshu Buddhists is self-reflection and examining ourselves. Okay? The reason for this is because Shinran in the Tanisho actually says that we should be figuring out for ourselves if this is the school of Buddhism for us, right? We have to, he says to many of his followers who came to him and said, we want to know if there's like some secret teaching that there is that you're not telling us, right? You say to us, just say Namo Amida Butsu. That's all that we need. But there has to be something else that you're not telling us, right? There must be some secret teaching that, and then he tells them, like, you traveled all this way. These people, think of like walking like 200 miles, right? Like they made this pilgrimage to come and see Shinran. And he said to them in this very polite manner, you came all this way to ask me this question if there's this secret teaching, this secret formula of Buddhism that I'm not teaching you. And I'm here to tell you that's not the case. My teaching has always been just say Namo Amida Butsu, because all the work has been done for us by Amida Buddha. Right? So you have to, and so he tells them, you have to figure this out for yourselves if this is the teaching for you. You can't constantly, look to this other like source of teachers, and think that you're just going to get this magical thing that's going to connect. Eventually, you have to sort of examine within yourself if this is the school of Buddhism for you. This is where the self-reflection comes into play. This is where your own personal faith, right, or your own personal trust is that action that we also do, right? It's, of course it's saying Namo Amida Butsu. But see, the problem is that we constantly, try in a sense to get others to think the way that we do. Right? We try to convince others that our way is right. We try to convince others that our way of seeing things is the truth. Right? And that's the thing. We see this in this country all the time. You see like those political arguments on CNN and MSNBC and Fox News. You see all these people yelling at each other because they think that their way of thinking is the correct way of thinking. Right? They think that in order for this country to succeed, you have to follow the way that I say, and it has to be done in this particular way, right, in order for this country to work. But the truth is, right, when we think about human logic and human calculation, this is what unenlightened thinking is. This is this sort of motion of self-deluded thinking or self-truth of actualization, of how we sort of see the world. And the way that we see the world is a very narrow scope. I hate to say this, right? And even coming from myself, I'm not saying I see the world exactly the way that we think it is, but this is part of the Buddhist teaching. Recognizing this. Recognizing the fact that Buddha knew, Shakyamuni Buddha, the historical Buddha, knew the human condition. He knows the human condition. He knew the human condition. He knows that this is why countries go to war. This is why we have small arguments. This is why we fight over money. This is why we fight over possessions. All of these things. He realized that the reason for the cause of a lot of this suffering is our self-deluded minds thinking that we are right. And one of the most dangerous things is when we have people who are really really privileged people in power who have access to a lot of weapons, when they try to force other people to see their way of thinking, right? So this is part of what our sect of Buddhism is for, right? It's for our own self to reflect. Right? Our self-reflection for ourselves. And this isn't to say that we just should be passive and not do anything, right? Especially when we see injustice happening right in front of us. Buddhism, right, is a religion that truly understands the human condition. The fact that we are all afflicted with the three poisons, greed, anger, and ignorance, right? Greed. We're all human. We want things. Anger, when we don't get what we want, when people don't see our way, we get mad. And then ignorance. Ignorance is not just like, okay, and by the way, ignorance, when I'm talking about ignorance, I'm not saying that, you can't solve mathematical equations the way that Stephen Hawking did, right? That's not the type of ignorance we're talking about. The type of ignorance we're talking about is refusal to accept things as they truly are. Okay, so if someone loses at a game or loses something, right, and they refuse to accept that they lost, and they start to blame the judges, they start to blame the game itself, they blame the other players for cheating, right, all those things, right, that is the ignorance that we're talking about. right? So the other type, and the other type of ignorance that we are talking about as well is when we truly lose someone who we love, right? When we lose someone who we love, either to death or a romantic breakup, right? We suffer and we get really upset. And this isn't to say, right? This isn't to say that we should just be these stoic robots and stones, right? We should, of course, cry and mourn the loss of people we love, right? But it's when we refuse to accept that, refuse to actually, when we cease to function, right? When we cease to function and be able to live our lives on a regular basis. This is that type of suffering, right? So the Buddha truly sees all of this, and he actually gave us a teaching that we can all actually cling to, or I shouldn't say that word, cling to, but go to, and that is the Nembutsu. See, when you think about, by the way, don't worry, I have a, things like this don't bother me anymore, right? You think that a kid making noise and something like that, totally fine. Children make noise. Children yell, they talk. It's wonderful. It doesn't interrupt my talk whatsoever. I will admit this. I used to be one of those people, why are those kids here? Why are those kids sitting in the plane annoying me, right? I used to think that. Now I have a son, I'm like, nope, this doesn't bother me whatsoever. I love it. I love these noises. I love these noises now. And see, maybe sometimes, taking a child out of a room is not, and believe it or not, actually, taking a child out of the room is not to make it easier for you all, although even though it might, it's because it's easier on the child. Sometimes a change in environment is the thing that actually helps to soothe the child. It's not to make you all more comfortable. It's to make the child more comfortable. Right? Sorry, that's a bit of a digression. That's my dad brain. Going back to the Nembutsu teaching, why did Shakyamuni Buddha give this to us? Shakyamuni Buddha gave us the Nembutsu teaching, saying Namo Amida Butsu, because of its easy practice. Now, don't get me wrong. Just because something is easy doesn't mean that there isn't a lot of depth to it. Okay? If you don't believe me, read Shinran Shonin's Kyogyo Shinshu. Your mind's going to just totally go blank and it's totally just going to be... But that's his dissertation. That's Shinran Shonin's dissertation of why the Nembutsu works. But the short answer to all of this is because the depth of work that's already been done for our benefit, right? The depth of work that's already been done for our benefit is the key to why this works, right? Now again, Nembutsu, Namo Amida Butsu, is not going to make you rich. It's not going to get you that promotion that you're all looking for. That's the greed, anger, and ignorance part, right? Ooh, get promotion, get more money, buy more things, right? That's not what it is. Namo Amida Butsu is there as a spiritual guide and as a reminder that constant compassion and constant care is there for us, which is why I go back to this. Jishin Kyoninshin. Okay? You have to resolve whether or not the Nembutsu teaching is for you first, before you even think about telling it to other people or saying it to other people, just as it is in life. Right? Of course, as parents, right? For a lot of you who are parents, you come with so much grounded experience of life. Life has done a lot of things to you. And that's why in many ways you are the perfect teachers, because you are there to impart this wisdom to your children. But at the same time, right? Even as parents, and I have to say, and I'm saying this to myself, even more so than any other parent in the room here, I also must still have this beginner's mind of realizing that I may be a parent, I may be well more experienced, but I'm still learning. And I'm still a first-time student, especially with my first child. My first child is just as much of my teacher as I am a teacher to this child. So this is where this Jishin Kyoninshin comes into play. And this is also at the same time, right, the best example that they say, right, when you're on an airplane and when they also tell you, right, when the oxygen masks drop, before you put the mask on your child, you got to put it on yourself first, right? I used to think that was cruel. I used to think that was, why would you do it? Of course the child should be the first priority. Of course, as parents, we all feel that. But the truth is if we don't function, if we cease to function, how can we possibly manage our children? How can we possibly manage this, right? So the same thing goes with the teaching of Buddhism. If you're not fully resolved in that teaching, if you aren't fully invested in it yourself, why would you even bother trying to preach it to other people? And not to say that you should, not to say that you should go out and start, throwing the teaching of Buddha at people or, waving it in the air as you see some other folks do. The best way that you can share this teaching, especially with Nembutsuge teaching, is the way you live your lives, right? How you treat other people, what you say to them, how you respond to difficult situations, how to respond to adversity, right? If you respond in anger all the time, right? And sometimes we may mess up. That's okay. It's important that we acknowledge that we will. But if you respond in anger all the time, and if you respond and you have to see things my way, are we truly grasping those teachings of Buddhism? This is where it comes into play, right? Not in standing on street corners or at other events, right, saying you have to believe in Jodo Shinshu, you have to say the Nembutsu, right? But in how we conduct ourselves, how we live our lives in the world, in society, how we treat our children, how we treat our parents, how we treat the Sangha around us, right? This is what the Nembutsu is for. The Nembutsu is there to remind us again and again and again that we are imperfect, unenlightened beings. Not as a pejorative way of saying this, but as a truthful way of saying this. Are you enlightened? Am I enlightened? Absolutely not. Right? That's not to say that it's a bad thing, or that it's a horrible thing, or that we're horrible people. It's just a truthful thing. We are prone to mistakes. And this is why Shakyamuni Buddha gave us the Nembutsu teaching. Because he realized he's not going to be around forever. Is Shakyamuni Buddha still in this world? No, he existed 2,500 years ago. So he's long gone. That's not to say that his influence isn't still here. But this is where his influence continues, the Namo Amida Butsu. Okay, Namo Amida Butsu is his continued influence. It's to remind us of constant wisdom and compassion that continuously works for us. And again, if you think, or if you want this wisdom and compassion to work for us in a way that benefits us selfishly, like get us more money, give us more material wealth, give us or make it so that other people fall under our influence, right? You are truly not seeing what Namo Amida Butsu is for. When you truly live your life authentically in your best self, the best versions of yourself, that is when Namo Amida Butsu is truly working. So I would like to thank all of you very much for attending today's. It's wonderful to be back. And it's wonderful to see all of you and to interact with all of you. But I'm not going to lie. There is a big part of me, and this is my unenlightened brain, that just wants to get in my car and drive back up to Tacoma and be with my son. So, with that being said, I certainly hope you enjoyed today's Dharma gathering. And we're not done yet. We still have a special program that will follow. But in closing of my Dharma message, will you please join me in Gassho? Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Nam Mandats. Nam Mandats. Nam Mandats.